Hello, this is Lisa Elwine. Welcome back to our series on the 7 Abominations of the Wicked Lamp. We have now worked our way all the way to the 6th seal of Revelation. So we have the 12 tribes of Israel. They were taught to gather at the tabernacle at specific time during the feasts. And sometimes that tent was called the Ohel Moed, which means the tent of meeting. It's a place for the tribes to meet at the appointed times, for the feasts of the appointed times. And I think this is exactly what we're seeing now as we look at this 6th seal of Revelation. We're seeing that the tent of meeting, the feasts that have been there since the 4th day of creation, even before humankind was created, there was the feasts. Now this tent, or this covering of meeting, is there for those who gather at the appointed times. Except this time, it's people from every nation, tribe, and tongue. There is a remnant from those nations who have come out to gather at the appointed time. Revelation 7:9 says, "After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation, and all tribes, and peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands. And they cry out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb." So you see here, we're talking about the 6th seal. We're getting ready for something. If you're looking at the 6th seal, you're getting ready for the 7th. And what are they doing? From every nation, tribe, and tongue. Well, every nation, tribe, and tongue, the Feast of Sukkot, which is the 7th feast, that's the Feast of the Nations. And so they're standing there before the throne and before the Lamb. They're clothed in white robes. They have palm branches, which is what you wave around. You wave around the lulav at Sukkot. They are ready for Sukkot. They didn't wait till the 7th seal to go out and try to find their palm branches. After the Day of Coverings, the Day of Atonement, Yom HaKippurim, they know where their palm branches are. And remember, the palm branches there, they represent trees of righteousness. That's who they are. And they're crying out, it says, with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. So when it says, after these things, that's a signal. That's kind of a phrase signal that tells you there's about to be a transition between the 6th and the 7th seal. After these things, what things? These things up to here. So after these things, there's going to be a transition from the 6th to the 7th seal. And what we see in this transition is a great multitude that's being queued up. They're assembling before the throne. They are there with the Lamb. They are ready for the great Hosanna, the Hoshiana, the Hoshana Rabbah of Sukkot. They're ready for the 7th festival. They're ready for the Shabbat rest, for those who are sealed with the seal of the living God. And so that's why it's important. I always say we just had Sukkot, and if you're not already thinking about Passover, you're late. You know what? After each feast, the next day, you should wake up thinking about the next feast, and the next feast, and the next feast. Because these folks right here, they didn't wait till Sukkot hit to get their lulavs. Their branches are in their hands. And so that's an example to us. These things have been given to us from ancient times so that we will be prepared for times to come. And so in this transition, where finally we're going to see the 7th abomination of the wicked lamp fall, instead we have been covered by Yom Kippur, and we are prepared for Sukkot. We have been sealed over. So we've got this tabernacle in the wilderness. It's called a Mishkan. And it was the Ohel Moed. It was the tent of meeting. It sounds like Israel has assembled under this tent of meeting. You know, it talks about how he spreads his tent in the sky to cover us up. But if you could read it in Hebrew, where it describes the construction of the Mishkan, what you find out is that it was held together. The construction of it was held together with tiny little pegs or nails. Teeny tiny little pegs and nails. I call them hooky bits. But they're vavim in Hebrew. Vavim. The little nails, the little pegs that held the tabernacle together. Well, what's a vav? A vav is right there. It's the number 6. It's the little sixes. It's the little human beings created on the 6th day of creation who are holding the Messiah, the body of Messiah together now. Remember, they have learned to live with sacrificial love. And because they've learned to speak the truth, they're not false witnesses, breathing out lies, they are holding to their witness. They are holding to their witness. And therefore they have learned how to hook in to the little hooky bit next to them. They have learned how to hook in to the believer next to them. And then the believer next to them. They are joined together. Just like those camps in the wilderness, there was no weak spot. No matter where you went, you ran into a tribe guarding that spot around the tent of meeting. And so now that they are fitly joined together with this spirit of knowledge, they can rest on Shabbat. They are prepared to rest. What was told to the souls under the altar who are crying out, "How long, O Lord, until our blood is avenged on the earth?" They were given a white robe and told to rest for a little while. So what's about to happen? The faithful, they're wearing their white robes, and they're going to rest for a little while this indignation goes on in the earth, while the cleansing goes on in the earth. They're the little vavim, they're the little sixes. And think about the nails that were driven into the hands and the feet of our Messiah. You know what? Those very nails of sacrifice are what are holding our tent of meeting together. Those very nails of sacrifice have created a tent for us to Sukkot in. So we're going to have to do the same thing. We're going to have to yield our hands and our feet to suffering for the sake of the gospel. There's no way around that. If we're going to be fitly joined together, that has to occur. But once that is fulfilled, once that appointed time has come, then we will be fitly joined together. And we're going to be resting for a little while. In fact, it's traditional at the Feast of Sukkot, at this great Hosanna, or this Hoshana Rabbah, for everybody to march around the Bima, which is the place where you'll unroll the scroll for the public reading. Remember I said where it says in Revelation, the sky was split like a scroll rolled up. Well, when you re-roll the scroll in the synagogue each year after you've gotten to the end of Deuteronomy, is at Sukkot. And so you re-roll it because now you have to go back to Genesis. Where do you do that? Well, typically you read the Torah scroll on the Bima in the synagogue. And this is coming out of the Jewish tradition. And so in the book of Revelation here, we begin to see this process, and we see the children of blessing in that sukkah, holding the palm branches. They're yielded their hands and their feet as instruments of righteousness, and we're commanded to rejoice at Sukkot. So it's not a time for them of destruction. It's a time for them to rest, to rejoice, to be happy, to sit down and have those meals with the 7 shepherds. They're about to be covered by the sukkah of the one who sits on the throne And it's because of the blood of the Lamb that we are able to do that, this standard for the peoples that Isaiah talked about, Yeshua. They're not going to have to suffer anymore for the sake of the gospel. Those days are over. Those numbers have been completed with the faithful from every nation, tribe, and tongue. And John says, John is asked, he says, who are these? And he says, Lord, you know who they are. A little play on word there, because when John says, you know, remember, here at the conclusion of the sixth seal, it's the spirit of knowledge is the sixth spirit, the at. And John says, Lord, you know them. You know them. Remember what Yeshua said? There's going to be people who come to me and say, we cast out demons in your name, we did all these miracles. And I'm going to say, depart from me, I never knew you. I never knew you in the fellowship of my suffering. See, that's having understanding of a certain passage of text or your little pet doctrine. That can only take you so far. But when we get over here, the question is, have you known Yeshua in the fellowship of his suffering? Would you take that little pet doctrine to the cross? Think about it. Goes back to, is this truth, or is this the truth that you know and makes you feel good when you share it? Because if it's a truth you're willing to die for, to lay down your life for your brothers, then you might be onto something. But if you're willing to lay that down and say, you know what, maybe I wasn't so sure after all, if you're actually going to nail me to a cross over it, that might be an indication that there's still room to move toward the unity of faith. Lord, you know. These people in this group you have known in the fellowship of your suffering. They've gone far beyond just wisdom and understanding of your word. They have been resurrected by your word. They have come under the authority of your word. They have been resurrected living creatures of your word. And they have lived sacrificial lives for your word. You know them, and they know you. And it's, again, it's associated with the sixth feast, which is Yom HaKippurim. And remember, you don't stand as an individual at Yom Kippurim the way that you do at the Feast of Trumpets. You're judged as an individual here. But when you get here, you're a nation. You stand and you are judged as a nation. So this nation has stood for judgment, and they have emerged in righteousness, and they are prepared for Sukkot. So, John is saying, the Lord knows this multitude. They can enter into his kingdom rest. He loved them sacrificially, and they in return knew and loved him sacrificially. That was even Peter's response. If you remember, when Yeshua said, Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? It says Peter was grieved that he had to ask him 3 times. But you know what? 3, it's the number of resurrection. And Peter said, Lord, you know all things. And what he knew is that Peter would know him in the fellowship of his suffering, all the way to the cross. The spirit of knowledge, that's that spirit of sacrifice that connects us to Sukkot. So, as we go on into the sixth seal, that's a little heavy. I almost feel like I should pause for a moment so we could reflect on that. But truly, I think we're living in a time where more and more we are being asked to sacrifice for our faith. It's costing us more and more to hold on to our faith. It's costing us more and more, and therefore we have an opportunity to know him more and more in the fellowship of his suffering. And you know what he say? Count it all joy when you fall into these various tribulations, because you are knowing him, and you will be able, with this sort of practice, we will be able to stand in an evil day. We will be able to say, I didn't just study the word and put some videos out there and teach at a few conferences, or, you know, lead a few Bible studies that made me feel good. I gave you my life for this. You gave me a gift of being able to see your word, to be able to say we will do and we will hear. And then you gave me the strength step by step to endure the tests. And so each step is a gift. And, the fear of Adonai, it will keep you going down that road. Because ultimately, as we look at being queued up here at the sixth seal, that's the spirit of knowledge. But what's the seventh spirit? The spirit of reverence. And so if you make it here, there's not much chance that you don't have the reverence of Adonai. Because remember, Shabbat is simply the culmination of everything you've prepared on the 6 previous days. And so on the 7th day, you can rest in it. So what's going to happen here? Somehow you're going to fall off a wagon somewhere? No. These things right here, those are your preparation. And then he completes them in you in that Shabbat rest. And that's when you realize what it means to rest in the spirit of reverence on Shabbat. That's why you practice on Shabbat. Because ultimately, the spirit of reverence, it's the beginning of all wisdom. Right? And they're even one. He declares the end from the beginning, right? So let's go on. We have a passage from the 6th seal, and it has a connection to traditional Jewish thought about something called Musar. And Musar has to do with ethics, building your everyday ethics, your character. Again, how is this word that you're reading transforming you? Are you simply becoming smarter and smarter in book knowledge? Or as you read the word, are you allowing the Spirit to transform something inside of you? Is your character changing? Not just with your relationship to the Holy One, but is it changing in relation with your brother? Because remember that 7th abomination, separating brothers, for people of righteousness, what they are learning is how to come into unity with their brothers. And so this thing called Musar, it's a matter of making Torah study relational, not just words on a page, or trying to outdo one another with how much we know. And that's the purpose of reading the Torah. Even the kings of Israel, they were commanded to write 2 copies of the Torah scroll. And they needed to read it all the days of his life. In order to, Deuteronomy 17, 19, and 20 will tell you the rationale here. For this king who's going to write 2 copies of the scroll, first, it will remind him to fear Adonai. Again, goes back to that completion. See, if you've got the fear of Adonai, you've got the whole package. So that he will perform the commandments. It's not just going to be head knowledge. He'll actually do it. And then the third thing is very important. It says he will not become proud and haughty over his brothers. 7th abomination, one who separates brothers. There's nothing that will separate brothers like pride. See what's going on here? He's saying, I don't want you to become proud and haughty over your brothers. Why? Because you would begin to do things eventually as the wicked lamp progressed in you, so that at the end you would separate your brothers. Right? He says, this is not what I want for the kings of Israel. I want them to fear me, to do my commandments, and therefore I want them to be the opposite of prideful over their brothers, so that ultimately they can come into the unity of faith and bring the nation into the unity of faith. So the Torah should always bring about inner transformation. It's a spiritual document that you have to receive with a spiritual tenderness of heart. The king of Israel sits on the throne, and he's not there just to reign and boss people around and collect lots of taxes. He's also there to judge his kingdom. So wise judgment, remember King Solomon, he asked for a hearing heart. You know, he says, what can I give you? And King Solomon says, I need a heart that hears. And if you have a heart that hears, then you can prolong the days of the king, and you can prolong the days of his offspring. But we don't ever need to believe that somehow we've arrived, because with King Solomon, there came a point in his life where all of a sudden the things that were written to him did not apply to him. Where it says, don't multiply wives and horses to yourselves. Well, that's exactly what he did. But this particular little scroll, or this particular scroll of Torah that the kings were to write, is thought to be the book of Deuteronomy, or Devarim. And it's sometimes referred to as the Mishneh Torah, or the repeated Torah. It's the book probably most quoted by Yeshua in the Gospels, because it's a summary of the previous books. Deuteronomy is kind of a recap. Now, you will get new information, but the subject has probably been dealt with on some level before in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, or Numbers. Sometimes it will clarify a commandment from a previous book, or a statute. But what it is, it's a little scroll representing the whole Torah of the full 5 books. And it's in this little scroll of the Mishneh Torah, the book of Deuteronomy, that we read in the Torah portion Shoftim, that's urging all Israel, and especially its judges, justice, justice you shall pursue. And so when we look at that context, as we go back to Revelation 6:12, it says, I looked when he broke the 6th seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to earth, as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Then the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the commanders, and the rich, and the strong, and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, fall on us, hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? Right, so we see here a rectification. In the little scroll, Torah portion Shoftim, kings are commanded that they should not become haughty. The judges are commanded that they should not prefer the more influential litigants in a case. The heart condition of Israel is addressed right here, because this is the core of what seems to be a very legal section of the little scroll of the Mishneh Torah. This heart condition is addressed in Musar, or Torah ethics, because it's understood that Adonai will execute judgment on every hidden thing. Well, that's just exactly what we read out of Revelation. Every hidden thing. The kings of the earth, The great men, the commanders, the rich, the strong, slave, free, everybody. They're trying to hide themselves in caves and among the rocks of the mountains. Fall on us. Hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne. What are they trying to do? They are trying to hide from judgment in the little scroll. And so the people of the earth who are hiding during the sixth seal of Revelation, they're being sought out for judgment, no matter where they're hiding. And there's really no place they can hide. If this little scroll is being executed upon the earth, it doesn't matter if you are the king or if you are the lowest person on the social totem pole. There is no place to hide from justice you shall pursue. You know, it says in Psalm 14:1 and 53:1, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have committed abominable deeds. There is no one who does good. Is that talking about atheists? Not primarily. Now, an atheist will still fit in that group. But the fool that says in his heart there is no God, at the time this is written, there's really no atheists to speak of. Everyone believed in a God or gods. The understanding is that there's an ellipsis there in the context. There is no God who will judge me for my evil works. Therefore, I will continue my evil works because there's no God who will judge me. Even though we are told, justice you shall pursue. And so in that way, yes, a modern atheist could still fit into that category because he doesn't believe in a final accounting of judgment. And that's what the fool thinks. There's no accounting. There is no final throne judgment, and I'm not going to have to give an accounting of my life. And so I'll live my life accordingly. It's pretty short-sighted, but it's giving yourself permission to act any way you decide in the moment and set up your own rules. You might have I've heard people do this a lot. Well, I may be doing such and such, but I'm not doing that. Well, all you're doing is creating your own set of justice, your own set of ethical rules. That's what's going on now in this woke universe. They're just creating their own rules day after day, morning after morning, and they'll change the next morning. The word itself is unchangeable. The Torah is not going to change because the one who gave it to us changes not. It won't ever change. And if you can fool yourself into believing you will not have to account for the justice that is in this little scroll, you're just fooling yourself. You're the biggest fool of all who thinks he's going to judge you by your own rules. That's not God. You just made yourself a God. You think he's going to judge you by your rules. No, that's foolish. So this is why we want to stay immersed in the Word, because he won't judge us based on the rules we make up. He won't judge us by the buffet of rules we pick from his Word. There are no buffets at the judgment. So it doesn't matter who you are. You will be judged according to the Word. And so Musar is thought to be important because it brings about this transformation, this inner transformation of the Torah. So that, because if it's just out here in the periphery, it's just things we study or rules we make up ourselves, then there's really no lasting change when we read the Word. But if it brings about that lasting change, if we begin to conform to the image of Messiah, Musar being that ethical person that we present to the world, then that is a necessary thing to prepare us for this justice and this judgment in the little scroll. Now, for Christians, a lot of this can be accomplished through New Testament study, which really does emphasize godly character. Not just salvation, it does emphasize godly character. And what we're reading in the Word should change our character. Because what it pushes us to do is not just to think about our character, but to think of the accounting that is still out there. And this is what we do in these long days of darkness while we await the ultimate judgment. As we're looking at the sixth seal, as we look at the fifth trumpet, even in the long days of darkness and judgment, when the sun is obscured and it's actually going to lengthen the days of darkness, if we have allowed that transformation of the Holy Spirit to work that musar, that ethical change, then we really don't have anything to worry about in terms of being judged according to the little scroll. The darkness is not going to make a difference to us.